Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond.
The universe without Lazenby. When I first saw the VHS collection of James Bond movies at Blockbuster Video, a few things always stood out. 1. The Bond movies were put in alphabetical order in their own section. I think it was by the action movies. And 2. George Lazenby. This was the VHS I saw that always made me think, is this movie in the wrong section? I want to start out by saying I like On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think it is one of the better made Bond films overall, and there is a reason the franchise keeps referring to it. And it's not hard in some ways to see that future Lazenby movies would have been great. And there is a universe out there where Roger Moore never gets cast as James Bond. I want to save the conversation of a Lazenby Spy Who Loved Me for another day. But first, I want you to imagine a timeline where Sean Connery completes the Blofeld trilogy and makes On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
That must be dreaming.
The pace at which movies were pumped out back in the early 1960s would rival sequels to slasher films in the 1980s. Once Sean Connery was cast as the British secret agent, he made one movie per year for his first 4 years in the role. Compare that to Daniel Craig, who made his first 4 films in 9 years, or Brosnan's 4 films in 7. The success of Dr. No created bigger budgets and more spectacle. The films had more realistic stunts and action sequences with some real dollars behind it. The sensation, which was Goldfinger and Thunderball, led to a problem. Up to this point, the first 4 Connery movies have their own separate storyline with a little bit of Spectre sprinkled throughout. But the track that the franchise was on was taking Connery's Bond to a true character arc, falling in love, losing that love, and getting revenge. The timeline in the books for this trilogy starts with Thunderball, where Bond infiltrates Spectre. Then, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Bond meets Blofeld, and then You Only Live Twice, where Bond gets revenge against Blofeld for the death of Tracy. And this would have made an amazing few films for Connery to end his tenure on. What happened? Well, when scouting the location of Majesty's, it turned out that the mountains had a dry winter and not a lot of snow. The producers thought that they really needed the extra snow for the film, so they came to a crossroad. This decision the producers made would change the course of Bond history. They could either scrap the movie and go with another book they could shoot now, or wait the year and begin the following winter. To be fair, the producers had no idea what they had and how this movie franchise would last over 60 years and be scrutinized in and out. But, in hindsight, I wish they went with not filming and waiting. I think this for so many reasons. First, Connery was exhausted. Making the films at the pace he did, while also making other films in between, seems exhausting just to witness. I mean, he did Hitchcock's Marnie in there somewhere. Connery was notorious for being unhappy on the set of You Only Live Twice. It would not even work if the producers were in the room. He even noted of a Japanese photographer trying to get a look at him while he was in the bathroom. He needed a year or 2 off from being Bond. Second, it is the only choice that makes sense if you are following the books at all, which they were to a point. They followed them pretty well at the time considering the racism, sexism, and homophobia. So why would you change the course of this amazing arc Connery has coming and make another one instead? And why the fuck would you make your next one You Only Live Twice? The one that comes after Majesty's? Why? Why not just do Diamonds or Live and Let Die? Anyway, the missed opportunity of Connery playing alongside Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas makes me sad. I feel Connery would have had the break he needed to put on 2 last great films that would have given him a logical conclusion. Imagine a real arc for James Bond in 1969, and not just a one-dimensional misogynist. How groundbreaking and progressive this character could have become so early on, and maybe younger generations wouldn't have such a distaste for Connery's actions to women in these films. So, imagine Connery in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Imagine Connery running to the beach over Tracy in the opening. Would director Peter Hunt have stayed away from Bond's face so long since we don't have to reveal a new actor? Maybe the opening is a bit different to fit more of Connery's vibe. Also, with Connery in the film, how does it seem when he quits the service?
Request, you will accept my resignation, effective forthwith.
Resignation from what?
Her Majesty's Secret Service. And kindly present us that monument in there.
Remember, Sean Connery never quits MI6. So imagine the shock audiences would have had to see him quit. Lazenby quitting isn't as big a deal since we have only seen him really in one scene as Bond. It also must be quite a scene to see M so cold about granting his request to quit when it's Connery who receives the disappointing news. I would have also liked to see him play with the old gadgets from previous films. But would they even have to put that in? Because we don't have to make a connection from Lazenby to Connery.
Sorry, ma'am.
Another thing. Does Connery get dubbed when he goes undercover as Sir Hilary? Or do they let him use his own voice? And does the costume department dress Connery like they dressed Lazenby as Sir Hilary? Yikes. Would Bob Simmons have gotten more screen time since Connery used a stunt double more than Lazenby did? Lazenby is noted right from the get-go at being a very physical Bond. The beach scene is clearly him, and the quick editing makes the fight scenes more intense. In this universe, would Peter Hunt have gotten to direct this movie? If You Only Live Twice hasn't happened yet, are the producers getting Lewis Gilbert to direct this one? Do the set pieces and action scenes have a bigger feel since they are directed by Gilbert, who directed You Only Live Twice, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker, 3 of the biggest Bond films of the early era? Think of how big those movies are in comparison to Live and Let Die or Dr. No. Connery should have had the scenes with Diana Rigg. The chemistry would have been better than it was with Lazenby. Not great, but better since he has already been established in the role. The falling in love montage would have been a bit different too. To be honest, most scenes would feel so different with Connery in the role. It would be difficult to imagine him in a falling in love montage with Dame Diana Rigg, because we tend to think of him as being completely cold to women, if not aggressive. But can you imagine the scene where Connery is hiding in the Christmas town, and all of a sudden, Tracy stops right in front of him? This moment would have transported us to believing that when Connery's Bond was at his lowest point, the love of his life shows up, and they escape together, ending the sequence with Connery proposing. Wow. Imagine where Sean Connery as James Bond utters the lines, "I love you. Will you marry me?" Has Sean Connery ever said those lines in a movie? Serious question. Despite Blofeld being the mainish villain in the Bond franchise, I think the best encounter they have is when Bond is caught snooping and Telly Savalas reveals his plan. So sinister, so cold, and yet it falls a bit flat with Lazenby. And honestly, I think he would have gotten much better had he done more films. But this scene would have really been peak Bond evil plan sequence. All the build up to Connery's Bond actually getting caught, and it truly seems like there is not a good way out. Well, they sort of do this in every Connery movie. He does get caught and finds a way to escape. What is not the most difficult to imagine is Connery in front of the rear projection and on location doing the action sequences. Lazenby's biggest asset is the fact that he has great fight sequences. He is so much more physical than Connery, but the producers had Lazenby do way more stunts than Connery, who mostly used stunt double Bob Simmons. But Connery in the bobsled scene, the ski scene, and by the way, Connery may be the only Bond to have never had a ski scene. Lazenby, Moore, Dalton to a point, Brosnan, and Craig all have had a ski sequence. Connery, not one. Lastly, the wedding scene. How is this scene shot with Connery in the role? I'd imagine it'd be similar, but does Connery cry? I'd like to think so. This movie was way ahead of its time, and if we had been privileged to see this conclusion with Connery's Bond having the 4-movie build-up to it, think of how great the follow-up would have been. You Only Live Twice would open up with Bond getting his revenge on Blofeld and Spectre. I'd imagine the feeling for moviegoers would have been similar to the cliffhanger in Batman Begins, knowing that the next movie has the Joker in it. On Her Majesty's Secret Service made a lot of money at the time, so it is safe to say that it probably would have made more with Connery in the role, and also having a 2-year break from a new Bond movie coming out. The anticipation would have been intense, and it may have broken records. This feels like an example of when you are just trying to do too much, and you end up losing more. The producers should have pumped on the brakes after Thunderball, because we always have to take a step back and re-evaluate the situation and not get complacent. When that happens, things fall through the cracks, like an angry and bitter Sean Connery who does a B Bond movie in 1983 against the Eon production of Octopussy. What happens after Majesty's in what would probably be 1968? Jump right in and you do You Only Live Twice by 1969 or 1970. By then, Connery can end his tenure on good terms, and never does Never Say Never Again. Now what? Roger Moore may have been cast right away, or maybe they cast a very young Timothy Dalton, who was considered at the time. No matter who gets picked, the next film is Diamonds Are Forever, then Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker, all throughout the 1970s, respectfully. Depending on who they pick will depend on how campy these movies end up getting. With Roger Moore being cast, I'm assuming he would be picking up on more of the light and funny parts of Diamonds, while Dalton would pick up on more of the dark mob, Vegas underground, funeral home vibes. This is more on the production, but you can't fake how an actor moves in a scene around them. And there is a truth about the character that comes out no matter what. Roger Moore was never too serious as Bond, and Dalton was not as funny. But let's say Moore gets the part, and we have a lighter Bond for 5 movies. This would all be a good fit for Moore, and it would have been a great tenure as he left us being shot into space. I'd even be okay if he stayed and finished up with For Your Eyes Only, because this is a good transition to a more serious Bond in a more grounded story. Roger even says no to a girl who is clearly too young for him. Then the 1980s gives us Dalton or Brosnan. I'm going to assume that the same events occur somehow, and there is a legal dispute with United Artists, which causes Dalton to end with License to Kill, only for Brosnan to take over in 1995 with GoldenEye. But Dalton would have started with Octopussy, without Connery making Never Say Never Again, there's not need for a panic rehire of Roger Moore, and he can retire Bond with dignity. Dalton brings that seriousness needed at this point, and I can only imagine how much better A View to a Kill is with Dalton in it. I'm assuming writers get the point after Dalton's first movie and make A View to a Kill a more watchable film. Timothy Dalton fighting Christopher Walken on the Golden Gate Bridge is a much better villain fight. Dalton with Grace Jones is also better. Dalton with every other actor works better. Moore was just too fucking old. Does this mean that with Dalton comes the new M and Moneypenny? Maybe they pick up another Moneypenny, but they already bring in Robert Brown for Octopussy anyway, since Bernard Lee dies after Moonraker. Anyway, it's fun thinking about this. It's fun thinking that Connery could have ended on a good note. It's fun thinking that Diamonds Are Forever could have been a better Roger Moore movie rather than a poor Connery one. It is fun to imagine Dalton getting more movies and really coming into his own by the time he does License to Kill. But I guess Brosnan still gets screwed with Die Another Day, and they terminate his contract before Craig takes over for Casino Royale. Sorry, Pierce.
Call it professional courtesy.